Hello everyone, and welcome to another quick Cut Rate Commander Precon upgrade guide, the series in which we give Precon decks a glow up without breaking the bank. My name's Grazzet, and today we'll be giving the Outlaws of Thunder Junction Desert Bloom Precon $35 worth of upgrades to bring it up to Cut Rate standards. As usual though, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you like this content. Consider supporting the channel directly either via my Buy Me a Coffee or Game Nerds affiliate links in the description if you really like it, and stick around to the end of the video to see what Precon will be covering next. So, with that out of the way, let's start by taking a look at the commander and playstyle. This deck's face commander is Yuma, Proud Protector, a 6/6 human ranger that costs 5 and Naya that has the following 3 abilities. Firstly, Yuma costs 1 less to cast for each land card in our graveyard. Secondly, whenever Yuma ETBs or attacks, we may sacrifice a land to draw a card. And lastly, whenever a desert is put into our graveyard from anywhere, we create a 4/2 green plant warrior creature token with reach. Sporting an absolutely massive CMC and a below-average stat block for his cost, Yuma's abilities thankfully allow us to cast him much more easily by taking advantage of our lands being in our bin to bring down his gargantuan mana cost, and then, once he's on board, lets us continue to use our lands to generate us card advantage by sacking them away, while simultaneously letting us build up our board with high-power bodies as we specifically send deserts into our bin from anywhere. Now, while tearing apart our own land base to draw cards may seem counterintuitive, the base deck actually has quite a number of ways for us to turn this rather severe drawback into less of a liability and more of a bonus, such as ways for us to make additional land drops, play lands from our graveyard, and even mass reanimate our lands from the bin in order to rebuild our mana base as quickly as we tear it down, as well as a variety of self-land destruction and landfall payoffs to generate us even more value and board presence alongside our commander as our lands constantly enter and leave play. And of course, because our commander cares specifically about deserts hitting our graveyard to build up our board, it should come as no surprise that the core build has plenty of deserts built into its land base by default that can pitch themselves from our hand or sack themselves away while in play to help proc Yuma without the need of any outside self-discard or sack effects, though the base build includes plenty of these as well so we can get even more deserts into our bin to proc Yuma even more often. So, as we can see, the core deck has a very respectable Lands Matter game plan built right into it out of the gate, meaning we can focus the majority of this upgrade guide into refining what the deck is already good at to help get even more mileage out of Yuma and all the other lands payoffs we have at our disposal, such as including more ways to sacrifice our lands, with a particular interest in ways to fetch up our deserts to set up our commander as we do so, adding in more ways for us to get extra land drops and or reanimate our lands from the grave to build up our land base even faster and proc our landfall payoffs more often, building up our landfall suite even more to take advantage of our lands constantly entering and leaving play to build up our board alongside Yuma or to generate us even more value, and even slotting in a few ways that allow our deserts to come into play untapped, since the majority of them are tap lands, to help speed up our mana base as we play, recur, and reanimate them. And then, once we fix the base build's woefully lacking draw package with both on and off theme entries to ensure we don't run out of resources, Yuma will be left with an impressive parcel of lands and ways to tend to them that will surely make him proud. So let us make our way to Thunder Junction, the newly discovered desert plain that Yuma now calls home. And just like most of the other folks that call this place home, he's looking to start a new life. But Yuma was no stranger to change though, whether it be from a lass to a fella, from an honest fella to a criminal, and now from a disgraced criminal to a fugitive. And here no one cared. He was only a stranger among strangers from countless plains. But while now he's best known for the bar he owns and the cocktails he serves, he's still no stranger to violence should demons from his past come to collect, a fact that he's more than willing to prove with a thunderbow at his side. So, now that we know a bit more about the commander and playstyle, let's jump straight into the upgrades. Starting things off with a fresh wave of land sacking effects to help proc Yuma and get lands into our bin to be recurred or reanimated, we'll be cutting Satyr Wayfinder and Crawling Sensation, both of whose indiscriminate graveyard setup via discard and mill respectively run too high a risk of hitting our playmakers rather than just our lands, so we'll be replacing them with Elvish Reclaimer and a Knight of the Reliquary, which instead allow us to repeatedly sack our lands to immediately replace them with any land from our deck to not only continually proc our self-land sacking and landfall payoffs, but also to let us tutor up our deserts directly into play to set up Yuma's token creation as well, replacing Winding Way, which is an okay way for us to dig for creatures or lands, but again runs the risk of hitting non-recurrable spells in doing so, with Crop Rotation, which functions as another land sacking land tutor to get us even more deserts into play cheaply and reliably while proccing our payoffs, exchanging out Thrilling Discovery, which is an okay if somewhat generic self-discarding source of card selection, for Sprouting Goblin, which instead gives us another repeatable way to turn our lands into card advantage alongside Yuma, and, if needed, we can kick it to fetch up a non-basic land for more fixing and or to get more lands into play to pitch and sack, trading out Heaven and Earth, which is an odd and somewhat underwhelming board wipe in this build, in favor of Zuran Orb, which provides us with a free land sack outlet we can use to mass proc Yuma, or to set up our mass land reanimation sources to net us the maximum number of landfall triggers possible, and often both. And lastly, swapping out Explore, which is a serviceable on-theme but boring cantrip, so we can swap in Nahiri's Lithoforming, which instead lets us convert as many of our lands as we want to into draw and additional land drops to reload our hands and mass proc our payoffs, which only gets better alongside cards that let us play lands from the bin to immediately get most of the lands we sacked right back into play. And while on the topic of extra land drops, we'll be slotting in a few more sources of it to help us replenish our land base as quickly as Yuma and our new and old sack effects can tear it down, in which we'll be taking out the bit to random self-milling land reanimator Eccentric Farmer, the serviceable but underwhelming land ramp source Elvish Rejuvenator, and the bit to situational land discarding draw source Nantuku Cultivator, in order to make room for Azusa Lost But Seeking, Wayward Swordtooth, and Mina and Dan Wildborn, all of which passively allow us to get more lands into play as soon as they come down, with the last one even letting us weaponize our lands as an instant speed way to grant our creatures trample, as well as cutting the somewhat odd inclusion Genesis Hydra, so we can instead add in the more on-theme Case of the Locked Hothouse, which again nets us an extra land drop per rotation, and, on top of that, eventually lets us play lands, creatures, and enchantments off the top of our deck to generate us card advantage as we naturally build up our land base. Then, in order to supplement our build's already solid selection of land recursion sources to further empower those extra land drops, we'll be removing Martial's Anthem from the build, as it's an okay AoE stat bump, but it doesn't really do much to enable our playstyle, so we'll be replacing it with Conduit of Worlds, which instead gives us another means to play lands from our bin for added redundancy, but even if we have another source of that in play, we can still use it as a way to cast any permanent from our bin, allowing us to recur our biggest threats again and again even if our opponents are able to remove them. Now, pivoting from land recursion and onto full-blown land reanimation to get even more lands back into play from our bin as we blow them up, we'll start off by replacing the underwhelming token creator turned timber sower and the much too slow and expensive land reanimating the Mending of Dominaria with the mass land reanimating Aftermath Analyst and Splendid Reclamation, both of which can instantly return all the lands we've been pitching and sacking throughout the course of the game right back into play to rebuild our land base with, which not only provides us with a massive amount of ramp, but a significant number of landfall triggers as well, removing the somewhat awkward to use removal spell Decimate so we can instead add in World Soul's Rage, which we can instead pump mana into to reanimate lands and deal damage to function as both a game plan enabler and a piece of spot removal and or burn, and finally scrapping the pure self-mill source Perpetual Timepiece so we can make space for Undergrowth Recon, which passively reanimates a land from our bin each turn to at least ensure we can replace the lands Yuma sacks while proccing our landfall triggers in the process. And speaking of landfall triggers, we'll be refining our selection of them as well to help generate more board presence and value as we constantly play, recur, and reanimate our land base. The former camp seeing us cut Scare Tiller, which we can't reliably tap down to get continual usage out of its extra land drop and land reanimation, and a Nesting Dragon, whose landfall token creation is nice in theory, but whose tokens require too much setup to come online to be effective, so we can add in Felidar Retreat and Rampaging Baloths, both of which can create more decent-sized bodies for us to build up our board with as we make our land drops, and the former also giving us the option to instead grow our entire creature base with +1/+1 counters to make already established board states even more dangerous, while the latter camp sees us remove the symmetrical recursion piece Skullwinder, and the bit too expensive card discarding Electric Revelation so we can make space for Tireless Tracker and Tireless Provisioner, both of which generate us passive value in the form of clues and treasures to help pad our core stats with the draw and ramp they provide, as well as shelving the build's other off-theme wipe, Descend Upon the Sinful, so we can slot in Lotus Cobra, which generates us even more ramp as we play and recur our lands to ensure we can cast our biggest spells as quickly as possible. And then, as our last pair of land-centric entries in this build, we'll be trading out Angel of Indemnity and Sun Titan, both of whose permanent reanimation can be powerful, but I personally found to be too expensive to get the most mileage out of in this build, so we'll be giving their spots to Tiller Engine and Spelunking, which not only allow us to play the majority of our deserts untapped to help speed up our mana base considerably, but also do the same for land tutors, land ramp sources, and land reanimation sources that bring lands into play tapped to speed them up as well, with the former also giving us the option to weaponize our land drops by turning them into repeatable tap down instead if we need to clear the way for an alpha strike. And then as the last of our upgrades, we'll be padding our core stats a bit by replacing the useful but unnecessary permanent recursion piece Sevine's Reclamation with the passive draw source Garrick's Uprising, which synergizes spectacularly with the tokens Yuma creates to both draw us cards as we create them and grant them trample so they can crash through blockers as they swing in, and swapping out the subpar removal pieces Unholy Heat and Angel of Ruins to swap in the better removal spells Path to Exile and Generous Gift, both of which allow us to more efficiently deal with our opponent's threats. So, now that we've covered all 25 cards that we've upgraded from the core build, let's take a look at the breakdown for this Precon upgrade. Looking at the stats that matter to our game plan, we have 16 ways to sacrifice our lands and 7 additional ways to mill and or discard lands to ensure we can load up our bin with plenty of lands throughout the course of the game, 14 ways to play lands from the bin and or reanimate them instead, along with 6 sources of extra land drops to ensure we can replenish our lands as quickly as we send them to our graveyard, 11 cards that care about our lands entering play, and 2 cards that care about our lands being sent to the graveyard to help generate us board presence and value as we constantly have our lands enter and leave play, and lastly, 15 deserts and 7 cards that care about deserts to generate us even more board presence and value out of our commander's interest in deserts specifically. For general deck stats, we have 24 ramp sources, 10 card draw sources, 9 targeted removal sources, and 1 board wipe. Our ramp being off the charts in this build since we're primarily a lands-focused deck that needs to be able to keep our mana generation high as we sack away said lands for value. Looking at our mana curve, we have an average CMC of 3.32, leaving us with a mid-weight curve that wants to come out of the gate, putting lands into play and into our bin to set up our commander and land recursion/reanimation sources as fast as possible. Then from there, once we get Yuma and our other self-land sacking and landfall payoffs into play, it's just a matter of us constantly having our lands enter and leave play to generate us more and more board presence and value, until Yuma and our other sources inevitably create enough tokens for us to overwhelm our opponents with. The final price of this build then comes out to be $75.29 after upgrades. This price does not include tax or shipping and assumes that the price you paid for the Precon was $40. The price of the cards was calculated by using the cheapest listed marketplace price on TCG Player at the time of this recording. Now, if we want to add even more upgrades by going over budget, we can perform a modest upgrade by replacing Magnetic Insight and Escape into the Wilds with Life from the Loam and Realms Uncharted to give us even more ways to get lands into our hand and graveyard, exchange Chromatic Lantern and Valorous Stance for Dryad of the Elysian Grove and Exploration to let us play even more lands per rotation by opening up our wallets even further, and if we want to push our credit lines to the limit, we can bench Vengeful Regrowth and Wreck and Rebuild in favor of Scape Shift and Crucible of Worlds to net us even more land drops from both our deck and graveyard. However, with this being a lands deck after all, I would be remiss to neglect mentioning upgrading some of our self-sacrificing lands into the fetch lands in our colors, Arid Mesa, Windswept Heath, and Wooded Foothills for even more consistency. Though this does open up the slippery slope of adding in even more expensive lands for them to fetch up, such as the Naya Triome, the 3 shock lands in our colors, and if we want to take our land base from a mere several $100s to over $1,000, the OG dual lands to truly flex our irresponsible spending at the game table. Thanks everyone for sticking around until the end of the video. So, with the Desert Bloom Precon upgrade complete, the next upgrade we'll be tackling will be the Spell-Slinging Quick Draw and its face commander, Stella Lee Wildcard, so look forward to that build coming soon. In the meantime though, it's time for y'all to vote on which of the 4 alternate commanders from these precons you'd like to see have a build of their own. Those being the plant buffing and recurring Kiri Talented Sprout, the spell-slinging Dragon Summoner Iris Roar of the Storm, the combat damage effect doubling Felix 5 Boots, and the mass treasure animating Vihan Goldwaker. So be sure to cast your votes, link in the description, before the deadline on April 20th, and let me know in the comments which commander you voted for and which commanders from this set you'd like to see me feature in future polls. And again, before we close out, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoy this content. Consider donating to buy me a coffee or use my Game Nerds affiliate link if you want to support the channel directly. And if you'd like to see more videos like this one, either click on the videos floating around my head for the latest builds, or click on the card above for a playlist of all the deck techs I've made so far. And with that, have a good one folks, and stay safe.